David Mickey's Shiny Side Out on freedomslips.com on the #1 listener supported talk radio on the net. So push the donate button or subscribe to the archives for roughly $5 US per month. If you are new to Shiny Side Out, welcome aboard. This is a tinfoil hat zone, so keep your arms within the vehicle, turn off your personal reality inverters, and please no flash photography. We're glad you're on board, so thank you for inviting us into your lives. So follow, subscribe, or otherwise for the appropriate social media. I keep saying that, social media platform. If it's and we do ask that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. The more the merrier, the more the better. Share the videos out and and help others become more informed. Let's do that. We're halfway through show number 446. I was hoping Mecky was back in. Mecky would say 640 and 400. And we're going to ask you to get yourself some great merchandise from the station's website. There's also a Patreon for them, and we've got one as well in our links inside our YouTube. You can get yourself an EMP-proof thumb drive with survival documents and seed packs and a whole bunch of things, but be careful to read the instructions and understand your customs laws. You may not, like in Australia, import seeds from another country because we have a unique biosphere here, and we'd like to keep it that way and not have those nasty pests and funguses and insects and all those things that we don't have. So, having said that, this is David Mackey's Shiny Side Out, and this is show number 446, as I said, physical biological artifacts. This is part 8 in the series. So the second hour of the last, maybe 9 shows, because we had a gap doing some personal roundtables with some friends, just chewing the fat, I suppose, a way to talk about topics. So if you like what you hear in this show, please go to our YouTube, subscribe, and like and comment. I read all the comments and I reply to them all, so don't feel like you can't, and don't feel like it'll just get nowhere, because we keep up with it. We have a website as well, shinysideout.net and shinysideout.com.au. Working on the security certificate for it. It still works. Just ignore any of the things. I'm just trying to make it so if you type your details in, it will be encrypted between your machine and our end. Like, you know what I mean? Like the website will be secure. Your details won't be used anywhere else. And that's it. It's a way of being able to disguise our email address within a web page form so that it can't be gleaned from scrapers on the internet, all right, that can find this stuff. Anyway, outside of that, thank you very much. This is such an interesting time to be alive. I can't believe it. The kinds of discussions Mecky and I are having about this in this civilization's, sine wave, I suspect, we might, hopefully we're still on the way up and we don't find any current cataclysm which may, cause it to decline somewhat or extremely and all of a sudden. However, there is evidence around on the planet which suggests that this has happened in the past. This magical date of 12,500 BC, or let's just roughly say 1400 years ago, or thereabouts, 14 to 1500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, sorry. There's a tools down event across the planet. There was a civilization that built with rather large stones. In fact, stones so large that we can't move them around today. If we did want to move them, we would have to, cart at 28 miles. We'd have to make a specific device just to move the rock, the single stone. And if we assume, wrongly of course, that they didn't have that tech, then examine for yourself the Jupiter Temple. The base of the Jupiter Temple. The Jupiter Temple was a Roman thing, but the base had stones that aren't movable today. And we don't have anything that can do it. And to move it so far, to quarry it and pick it up and move it, is still something we wouldn't do. The stones in the Machu Picchu, in the ancient component of that, are so large they look like they were sort of putty when they put them in. There's stonework all around the world, which proves that they had a technology in being able to work with stone, which Mickey and I have talked about in the past, which is exactly identical across continents, where we didn't think they had any connection at all with each other, but clearly they had education and a single, and when you look at the ancient text, Mackie, there's a single language that was talked about in the ancient text that after the flood, the antediluvian times, that's right, isn't it, Mackie? Antediluvian?
It sure is, my friend.
Post-flood, if you like it.
Pre-flood.
Oh, pre-flood. So the pre-flood time tech. But there's discussion the post-flood we were separated and we were given different languages, so we couldn't communicate.
Mm-hmm.
So
and be positive that telepathy was in fact the original
completely.
language.
And I think it's a skill we have even now. And I know the CIA or at Montauk, they were doing experiments with telepathy, and which we only can find a small portion of the documentation regarding that. But they were doing experiments to prove it. And Uri Geller actually is one of the only registered true psychics out there that was tested and he got 100%.
Yep.
In all his tests. So, yeah. Then he was obviously made a laughing stock when he went public with bending the spoons and things. But, maybe he actually could. Maybe he could transform metal and change its molecular structure. Maybe it's something that we've got, a skill that we just don't know. It sort of Mikey, it reminds me of America's Greatest Superhero, where he finds a suit and there's no instruction book, like they lose it. And it's got all these things it can do. That's like the human body. It's sort of like an allegory, I think, for where we are. And that we can do all these things, we just don't know that we can do them because the book was lost, like the instruction manual. Imagine having a video player today with no manual and there's no tapes, and you just sit on the shelf or you put it in a glass case and you go, look, there's this thing, and you're sort of staring at it. That's how we feel with the human body. We've lost our ability to pass that knowledge down. But what we've found is that the ancients had a way of being able to pass knowledge on from one group to the next, like an education system, where by doing it orally with a meter that kept like a checksum in data, it kept the integrity of the message.
And I think that was the prime purpose of the rhyming meters, because if you don't give it back correctly, right, it doesn't make sense anymore. It doesn't sound right, and that was the best way. And I think it's ingenious, to be honest with you.
Completely, Mackie. Did you know, in the correct accent, that Shakespearean text is a rhyming text with the right accent, and it's quite funny when the rhyme is exposed, and the word that it leads to because you're anticipating the rhyme, leads to a specific word. It's either stated, not stated, changed, and that's actually there's humor in this expectation. Let's say we do the same with music today, right? But one of my friends did a thesis on it and said that it didn't translate well. I think my friend was translating this to Arabic, and she said she had problem trying to translate it to meet that expectation, because when you translate something word for word, it loses its context.
Correct, and that's why you can never translate word for word. You can only, that's what's called translation.
Yes,
the word translation really means you're trying to approximate the meaning in another language. That's really what you're doing. Okay, if you literally translate word for word, what you get is complete nonsense. And that's, you can see this in some of the Singlish stuff, even Japanese English, where you translate menus or advertising. It's hilarious.
404 error.
Yeah, exactly. It just doesn't make sense.
So, born in a dead man's town, from Born in the USA, when I did the translation through 7 different languages, and each of them at one point existed as the Bible language.
I remember that. They did it for a language show.
Yeah, that's right. And the Born in a dead man's town was just born where a guy was dead, eventually. And that didn't, so born in a dead man's town means there's nothing there for you. The town, you will leave the town. You're bigger than the town. There's nothing there. But born just where someone was dead, the context of what the meaning behind that was so lost that it made no sense. So if I was going to beat someone over the head with the book, and trying to align myself to the verbiage as a result of going through so many mistranslations and all the, because it wasn't a story. Mickey, it's like trying to tell someone from, how many languages, sorry, how many words are there, they say, for snow, right?
Oh, but it's scores. Scores of words.
Yeah, scores, right? So if you live in the Arctic Circle and you're native there, I'm trying not to say Inuit, right, or something. So there's so many different words for it, but we don't have that.
No.
Right. We can't describe it the way they describe it. And if we were to try to, it wouldn't work to us because it doesn't translate. And this is the thing. So when we see ancient tech, the proof that something was there, and we hold it today and say, well, there we go. Here's a jawbone found from 2 million years in a strata between lava layers, which we talked about last week or the week before. But someone's claiming, well, that was in sedimentary deposit, but it was between two datable lava layers. Now, the sediment between was laid between the lava layers, and you can date the lava layers. So the arguments, making the thin argument, or either just discrediting the person who makes the claim. Oh, you're not an expert. You're not a scientist.
Absolutely. But as we learned, Dave, though, there are quite a few people of the scientific community that in fact did share, that the opinion that these finds are of significance, right? And they had dismissed for other reasons at that point, right? Or there's there's this and that, and they're creationists or something else. There's always something wrong with the people putting forward the argument, and it's really sad. So looking at the Calavera skull here is where we should start going on. This is for page 45, I think, because I don't think we finished it all. It's important that we go on here. The authors discussed numerous stone implements that were discovered in the auriferous gravels of the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. Human bones were also found in the gravels, which range from 9 million to 55 million years old. In February 1866, Mr. Madison, the principal owner of the mine on Bald Hill near Angels Creek, and again we're quoting here from Michael Cremos and Thompson, a book, Forbidden Archaeology, right? That's really the text we're going to here. And I know people say, oh, they're Hindu creationists. Yeah, but doesn't mean they're wrong. The evidence is there. But what you make with the evidence, you decide for yourselves. And there is a knowledge filter. There is a bias. There's confirmation bias. There's all of that. People say, "Oh no, that's nonsense. That's not true." It is true, in my opinion, and I think there's a sinister agenda behind it. But again, make up your own mind. So again, in February 1866, Mr. Madison, the principal owner of the mine on Bald Hill near Angels Creek in Calaveras Country, removed the skull from a layer of gravel 130 feet below the surface. The gravel was near the bedrock, underneath several distinct layers of volcanic material. Volcanic eruptions began in this region during the Oligocene, continued through the Miocene, and ended in the Pliocene. Since the skull occurred near the bottom of the sequence of interspersed gravel and lava layers at Bald Hill, it would seem likely that the gravel in which the skull was found was older than the Pliocene, perhaps much older. After finding the skull, Madison later carried it to Mr. Scribner, an agent of Wells Fargo & Co. At Angels. Mr. Scribner's clerk, Mr. Matthews, cleaned off part of the incrustations covering most of the fossil. Upon recognizing that it was part of a human skull, he sent it to Dr. Jones, who lived in the nearby village of Murphys and was an enthusiastic collector of such items. Then Dr. Jones wrote to the office of the Geological Survey in San Francisco, and after receiving a reply, he forwarded the skull to this office, where it was examined by J.D. Whitney, the state geologist. So these are not amateurs, Dave. These are not amateurs. Whitney at once made the journey to Murphy's and Angels, where he personally questions Mr. Madison, who confirmed the report that was given by Dr. Jones. Both Scribner and Jones were personally known to Whitney and were regarded by him as trustworthy. On July 16, 1866, Whitney presented to the California Academy of Sciences a report on the Calavera skull, affirming that it was found in Pliocene strata. The skull caused a great sensation in America. According to Whitney, the religious press in this country took the matter up and were quite unanimous in declaring the Calavera skull to be a hoax. Whitney noted that the hoax stories did not arise until after his discovery was publicized widely in newspapers. And it was the religious press that took up the report here. Anyway, some of the hoax stories were propagated not by newspaper writers, but by scientists such as William H. Holmes of the Smithsonian Institution. During a visit to Calaveras County, he gathered testimony from some people who were acquainted with Mr. Scribner and Dr. Jones, and this testimony raised the possibility that the skull examined by Whitney was not a genuine tertiary fossil. But there's a problem with the hoax hypothesis. There are many versions. Some say religious miners planted the skull to deceive the scientist Whitney. Some say the miners planted the skull to deceive another miner. Some say a genuine skull was found by Madison and later a different skull was given to Whitney. Some say Madison's friends from a nearby town planted the skull as a practical joke. This contradictory testimony casts doubt on the hoax idea. After visiting Calaveras County, Holmes examined the actual Calaveras skull at the Peabody Museum in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and concluded that the skull was never carried and broken in a tertiary torrent, that it never came from the old gravels in the Madison mine, and that it does not in any way represent a tertiary race of men. Some testimony supporting this conclusion comes from persons who examined the matrix of pebbles and earth in which the Calaveras skull had been discovered. Dr. F.W. Putnam of Harvard University's Peabody Museum of Natural History said the skull did not bear any trace of gravel from the mines. William J. Sinclair of the University of California also personally examined the skull and said the material attached to it was not gravel from the gold mine. He thought it was the kind of material one might find in a cave, where Indians sometimes placed bodies. On the other hand, Holmes reported the following. Dr. D.H. Dahl states that while in San Francisco in 1866, he compared the material attached to the skull with portions of the gravel from the mine, and that they were alike in all essentials. And W.O. Ayres, writing in the American Naturalist in 1882, stated, I saw it and examined it carefully at the time when it first reached Professor Whitney's hands. It was not only encrusted with sand and gravel, but its cavities were crowded with the same material. And that material was of a peculiar sort, a sort which I had occasion to know thoroughly. It was, said Ayres, the gold-bearing gravel found in the mines, not a recent cave deposit. So you've got contradictory evidence, obviously. Regarding the skull, or rather statements, contradictory statements. Regarding the skull, Ayres noted, it has been said that it is a modern skull which has been encrusted after a few years of internment. This assertion, however, is never made by anyone knowing the region. The gravel has not the slightest tendency toward an action of that sort. The hollows of the skull were crowded with the solidified and cemented sand, in such a way as they could have been only by its being driven into them in a semi-fluid mass, a condition the gravels have never had since they were first laid down. Whitney, in his original description of the fossil, observed that the Calavera skull was highly fossilized. This is certainly consistent with great age. However, as Holmes pointed out, it is also true that bones can become fossilized over the course of a few hundred or thousand years. Yet, geologist George Ecker reported in 1891, I find that many good judges are fully persuaded of the authenticity of the Calavera skull, and Messrs. Clarence King, O.C. Marsh, F.W. Putnam, and W.H. Dahl have each assured me that this bone was found in place in the gravel beneath the lava. Becker added that this statement was made with the permission of the authorities named. Clarence King, as mentioned previously, was a famous geologist attached to the U.S. Geological Survey. O.C. Marsh, a paleontologist, was a pioneer dinosaur fossil hunter and served as president of the National Academy of Sciences from 1883 to 1895. But F.W. Putnam of Harvard's Peabody Museum, as you've seen, later changed his mind, saying that the matrix of the skull appeared to be a cave deposit. Can it really be said with certainty that the Calavera skull was either genuine or a hoax. The evidence is so contradictory and confusing that although the skull could have come from an Indian burial cave, we might regard with suspicion anyone who comes forward with any kind of definitive conclusion. The reader may pause, in this case the listener, to contemplate what steps one would take to make one's own determination on the true age of the Calavera skull. It should, however, be kept in mind that the Calavera skull was not an isolated discovery. Great numbers of stone implements were found in nearby deposits of similar age, and, as we shall see, additional human skeleton remains were also uncovered in the same region. In light of this, the Calavera skull cannot be dismissed without the most careful consideration. As Sir Arthur Keith put it in 1928, the story of the Calavera skull cannot be passed over. It is the bogey which haunts the student of early man, taxing the powers of belief of every aspect almost to the breaking point. Dave?
More human fossils from the California gold country. On January the 1st, 1873, the president of the Boston Society of Natural History read extracts from a letter by Dr. C.F. Winslow about a discovery of human bones at Table Mountain in Tuolumne County. The find was made in 1855 or 1856, and the details were communicated to Winslow by Captain David B. Akey, who had witnessed it. The discovery took place about 10 years before J.D. Whitney first reported on the famous Calavera skull. Winslow stated, and here's a quote, "During my visit to this mining camp, I have become acquainted with Captain David B. Akey, formerly commanding officer of a California volunteer company and well known to many persons of note in that state. And in the course of my conversation with him, I learned that in 1855 and 1856, he was engaged with other miners in running drifts into Table Mountain in Tuolumne County at the depth of about 200 feet from its brow, in search of placer gold. He states that in a tunnel run into the mountain at the distance of about 50 feet from that upon which he was employed, and at the same level, a complete human skeleton was found and taken out by miners personally known to him, but whose names he does not now recollect. He did not see the bones in place, but he saw them after they were brought down from the tunnel to a neighbouring cabin. All the bones of the skeleton apparently were brought down in the arms of miners and placed in a box, and it was the opinion of those present that the skeleton must have been perfect as it laid in the drift. He does not know what became of the bones, but can affirm to the truth of the discovery, and that the bones were those of a human skeleton in an excellent state of preservation. The skull was broken in only the right temple, where there was a small hole, as if part of the skull was gone, but he cannot tell whether this fracture occurred before the excavation or was made by the miners. He thinks that the depth of the surface at which the skeleton was found was 200 feet, and from 180 to 200 feet from the opening cut or face of the tunnel. The bones were in a moist condition, found among the gravel and very near the bedrock, and water was running out of the tunnel. There was a petrified pine tree from 60 to 80 feet in length and between 2 to 3 feet in diameter at the butt, lying near the skeleton. Mr. Akey went into the tunnel with the miners, and they pointed out to him the place where the skeleton was found. He saw the tree in place and broke specimens from it. He cannot remember the name of this tunnel, but it was about a quarter of a mile east of Rough and Ready Tunnel and opposite Turner's Flat, another well-known point. He cannot tell the sex of the skeleton, but it was of medium size. The bones were all together and not separated when found. The gravel just above the bedrock at Tulum Table Mountain, where the skeleton was found, is said to be between 33 and 55 million years old. This must be the age of the skeleton unless it was introduced into the gravels at a later time, and we are not aware of any evidence indicating such an intrusion. Dr. Winslow did not find any of the bones of the skeleton seen by Akey, but in another case, Winslow did collect some fossils which he sent to museums in the eastern United States. A skull fragment characterized by Dr. Wyman, a leading craniologist, as human, was dispatched by Winslow to the Museum of Natural History Society of Boston. The fossil was labelled as follows: from a shaft in Table Mountain, 180 feet below the surface in gold drift, among rolled stones near Mastodon debris. Overlying strata of basaltic compactness and hardness, found July 1857, given to the Reverend C.F. Winslow by Honourable Paul K. Hubbs, August 1857. Another fragment from the same skull, as similarly labelled, was sent to the Museum of Philadelphia Academy of Natural Sciences. Upon learning of the discovery, J.D. Whitney began his own investigation. He learned that Hubbs was a well-known citizen of Vallejo, California. I think that's right, and a former state superintendent of education. Whitney got Hobbs a detailed written account of the discovery, which occurred in the Valentine Shaft, south of Shaw's Flat. Whitney stated, "The essential facts are that the Valentine Shaft was vertical, that it was boarded up to the top so nothing could have fallen in from the surface during the working underground, which was carried on in the gravel channel exclusively after the shaft had been sunk. There can be no doubt that the specimen came from the drift in the channel under the Table Mountain. As affirmed by Mr. Hubbs, the skull fragment was found in a horizontal mine shaft or drift, leading from the main vertical shaft at a depth of 180 feet from the surface." Hubbs stated that he saw the portion of skull immediately after it being taken out of the sluice into which it had been shoveled. Adhering to the bone was a characteristic gold-bearing gravel. A stone mortar was found in the same mine. William J. Sinclair suggests tunnels from other mines had possibly intersected those of the Valentine mine. This might explain how the skull fragment got deep below the surface, but Sinclair admitted that during his 1902 visit, he was not even able to find the old Valentine shaft. This means he had no direct evidence that the Valentine shafts were connected to any others. His objection was simply a weak and highly speculative attempt to discredit a discovery he opposed on theoretical grounds. The gravels containing the skull fragment lay 180 feet below the surface beneath the lava cap of Table Mountain, which was 9 million years old. The oldest gravels below the lava are 55 million years old. The skull fragment could thus be from maybe 9 to 55 million years old. When examining a collection of stone artifacts belonging to Dr. Perez Snell, J.D., Whitney noted the presence of a human jaw. The jaw and artifacts all came from gold-bearing gravels beneath the lava cap of Tulum Table Mountain. The jaw measured 5.5 inches across from condyle to condyle, which is within normal human range. Whitney remarked, and I think just an aside, within normal human range, that would state to me that they've been finding things that were other than human range as well. Likely that that there might have been giants or other types found. Whitney remarked that all human fossils uncovered in the gold mining region, including this one, were of anatomically modern type. The gravels from which the jaw came could be anywhere from 9 to 55 million years old. Whitney also reported several discoveries from Placer County. In particular, he gave this account of human bones that were found in the Missouri Tunnel. In this tunnel, there's a quote, under the lava, 2 bones had been found, which were pronounced by Dr. Pagan to be human. One was said to be a leg bone. Of the character of the other, nothing was remembered. The above information was obtained by Mr. Goodyear from Mr. Samuel Bowman, of whose intelligence and truthfulness the writer has received in good accounts from a personal friend well acquainted with him. Dr. Pagan was at the time one of the best-known physicians of the region. According to information provided by the Californian Division of Mines and Geology, the deposits from which the bones were taken are over 8.7 million years old. In 1853, a physician named Dr. H. H. Boyce discovered human bones at Clay Hill in El Dorado County, California. In 1870, Dr. Boyce wrote to Whitney, who had requested information. He says, I purchased an interest in a claim on this hill on condition that it prospected sufficiently well to warrant working it. The owner and myself accordingly proceeded to sink a shaft for the purpose of working it. And it was while doing so that we discovered the bones to which you refer. Clay Hill is one of a series of elevations which constitute the watershed between Placerville Creek and Big Canyon, and is capped with a stratum of basaltic lava, some 8 feet thick. Beneath this there are some 30 feet of sand, gravel and clay. It was this clay that we came across the bones. While emptying the tub, I saw pieces of material which on examination I discovered were pieces of bones, and on further search I found the scapula, the clavicle and parts of the first, second and third ribs of the right side of a human skeleton. They were quite firmly cemented together, but on exposure to air began to crumble. We made no further discoveries. According to Whitney, Boyce stated there could be no mistake about the character of the bones and that he had made a special study of human anatomy. It keeps going, Mickey. I'll read the rest. William J. Sinclair persistently attempted to cast whatever doubt he could on the discovery. He said he could not locate the clay stratum because the slope was covered by rocky debris. He further stated, the impression conveyed is that the skeleton found by Dr. Boyce was at a depth of 38 feet. In undisturbed strata under 8 feet of so-called basalt. There is nothing, however, in the letter to show that this was the section passed through in sinking the Boyce shaft. Because of the ambiguity about the exact location of the shaft, Sinclair thus concluded the skeleton may have been found in such a place and at such a depth in the clay that the possibility of a recent interment could have been considered. The points raised by Sinclair are valid, and we agree that there are reasons to doubt the antiquity of the skeletal remains found at Clay Hill. Yet, the presence of such of so much rocky debris that Sinclair was not able to gain access to the stratum of clay at the base of the hill argues against rather than for the possibility of a recent burial into the clay from the slope of the hill. If there were a recent burial, it is peculiar that so few bones were recovered. This brings us to the end of our review of fossil human skeletal remains from the gold-bearing gravels of California. Despite the imperfections of the evidence, one thing is certain. Human bones were found in the tertiary gravels, dating as far back as the Eocene. How the bones got there is open to question. The reports of the discoveries are something vague and inconclusive, yet they are suggestive of something other than pranks by miners or recent intrusive burials by Indians. The presence of numerous stone tools, incontestably of human manufacture, in the same formations lends additional credibility to the finds. In an address to the American Association of the Advancement of Science, delivered in August 1879, O.C. March, president of the association and one of America's foremost paleontologists, said about tertiary man, and I quote, "The proof offered on this point by Professor J.D. Whitney in his recent work, Orif Gravels of Sierra Nevada, are so strong, and his careful, conscientious method of investigation so well known, that his conclusions seem irresistible. At present, the known facts indicate that the American beds containing human remains and works of man are as old as the Pliocene of Europe. The existence of man in the tertiary period seems now fairly established." Mecki. Anything? Earth to Mecki? Bedtime stories with Dave. Earth
Sorry,
to Mecki.
I was very much on mute. But it's look, it was a lot to get through, but it's important to understand the context and the work that went into it. So some of the bankers and some of the criticism always is that I was found by unqualified people. You know, these things were found by people that weren't scientists, geologists, archaeologists, paleontologists, whatever it might be. But the truth is that quite a few of these finds were made by a man of science. It's just the subject matter that was so incredible. What we're going to go into now is going to be even more incredible. And what we're going to discuss here with you now is from the book are the extremely old finds in Europe. But I do urge you all to get the book. And look, get an e-copy or PDF copy or lend it from, or go to the library and get it for free if you don't want to spend the money, right? Just people still go to the library, that is. but please do have a look at the evidence. And that's all we're saying, because people always say, "Oh, there's no evidence for any of the things that you're talking about." That's plainly not true. But nobody looks at that evidence. Okay, it is dismissed out of hand because it doesn't fit the theory. The theory is that man or man-like creatures arose, 2 million years in Africa and then populated the Earth from there. And there's so much. There's quite a bit wrong with that as well. If you look at other places of the Earth, where you find older remnants. But the point here is, and a few articles we're going to share with you at the end of discussing this book, that push the human arrival date, if you want to call it that, further and further back into the past. In the most recent push, it was by 100,000 years. It was pushed back by 100,000 years. Okay? But it still fits within the accepted theory here. Now, these are now discussions around extremely old finds. More evidence for human beings in the early and middle tertiary comes from Europe. According to Gabriel de Mortillet, M. Quigeres, reported the discovery of a skeleton at Delemont in Switzerland in ferruginous clays said to be late Eocene. About this find, de Mortillet simply said, "One should be suspicious of human skeletons found with the bones in natural connection." De Mortillet further stated that one should be cautious about a similarly complete skeleton found by Grégoux in Miocene strata at Midi de France. or midi de France. It is possible, however, that these skeletons were from individuals buried during the Eocene or Miocene periods. A burial doesn't necessarily have to be recent. The truly frustrating thing about finds such as these is that we're not able to get more information about them. We find only a brief mention by an author bent on discrediting them. Because such finds seemed doubtful to scientists like de Mortillet, they went undocumented and uninvestigated and were quickly forgotten. And this is really what happened to quite a bit of this evidence here as well. How many such finds have been made? We may never know. In contrast, finds which conform to accepted theories are thoroughly investigated, extensively reported, and safely enshrined in museums. And again, extreme anomalies. As we have seen, some scientists believed ape men existed as far back as the Miocene and Eocene. A few bold thinkers even proposed that fully human beings were alive during those periods. But now we are going to proceed into times still more remote. And this is going to get a bit difficult, I think, for a lot of people. Since most scientists had trouble with tertiary humans, we can just imagine how difficult it would have been for them to give any serious consideration to the cases we are about to discuss. We ourselves, and these are the authors, Cream and Thompson, were tempted not to mention such finds as these because they seem unbelievable. But the result of such a policy would be that we discuss evidence only for things we already believe. And unless our current belief system represents reality in total, this would not be a wise thing to do. And that is really great a thing to do. Just consider all the evidence. I mean, just look at it, just talk about it and dismiss it if you can. In December of 1862, the following brief but intriguing report appeared in a journal called The Geologist. In Macoupin Country, Illinois, the bones of a man were recently found on a coal bed capped with 2 feet of slate rock, 90 feet below the surface of the earth. The bones, when found, were covered with a crust or coating of hard glossy matter, as black as coal itself, but when scraped away left the bones white and natural. The coal in which the Macoupin County skeleton was found is at least 286 million years old and might be as much as 320 million years old. The final example here of anomalous pre-tertiary evidence are not in the category of fossil human bones, but rather in the category of fossil human-like footprints. Professor W.G. Burroughs, head of the Department of Geology at Berea College in Berea, Kentucky, reported in 1938, during the beginning of the Upper Carboniferous Coal Age period, creatures that walked on their 2 hind legs and had human-like feet left tracks on a sand beach in Rock Castle County, Kentucky. This was the period known as the Age of Amphibians, when animals moved about on 4 legs or more, rarely hopped, and their feet did not have a human appearance. But in Rock Castle, Jackson, and several other counties in Kentucky, as well as in places from Pennsylvania to Missouri inclusive, creatures that had feet strangely human in appearance and that walked on 2 hind legs did exist. The writer has proved the existence of these creatures in Kentucky. With the cooperation of Dr. C.W. Gilmore, curator of vertebrate paleontology, Smithsonian Institution, it has been shown that similar creatures lived in Pennsylvania and Missouri. The Upper Carboniferous, the Pennsylvanian, began about 320 million years ago. It is thought that the first animals capable of walking erect, the Pseudosacian, or the codons, appeared around 210 million years ago. These lizard-like creatures, capable of running on their hind legs, would not have left any trail marks since they carried their tail aloft. But their feet did not look at all like those of human beings. Rather, they resembled those of birds. Scientists say the first appearance of ape-like beings was not until around 37 million years ago. And it was not until around 4 million years ago that most scientists would expect to find footprints anything like those reported by Burroughs from the Carboniferous of Kentucky. Burroughs stated, each footprint has 5 toes and a distinct arch. The toes are spread apart like those of a human being who has never worn shoes. Giving more detail about the prints, Burroughs stated, the foot curves back like a human foot to a human-appearing heel. David L. Bushnell, an ethnologist with the Smithsonian Institution, suggested the prints were carved by Indians. In ruling out this hypothesis, Dr. Burroughs used a microscope to study the prints and noted the sand grains within the tracks are closer together than the sink grades of the rocks just outside the tracks due to the pressure of the creature's feet. The sandstone adjacent to many of the tracks is uprolled due to the damp, loose sand having been pushed up around the foot as the foot sank into the sand. These facts led Burroughs to conclude that the human-like footprints were formed by compression in the soft, wet sand before it consolidated into rock some 300 million years ago.
And not because someone carved them, yeah.
Bingo. Burroughs' observations were confirmed by other investigators. According to Ken Previet, Burroughs also consulted a sculptor. Previet wrote in 1953. Did you go for that carving in that kind of sandstone could not have been done without leaving artificial marks. Enlarged photomicrographs and enlarged infrared photographs failed to reveal any indication of carving or cutting of any kind. Burroughs himself stopped short of claiming that the prints were made by humans, but his presentation leaves one with a strong impression that they were human. When asked about them, Burroughs said, "They look human. That is what makes them especially interesting." Mainstream science reacted predictably to any suggestions that the prints were made by humans. Geologist Albert G. Ingalls, writing in 1940 in Scientific American, said, "If man, or even his ape ancestor, or even that ape ancestor's early mammalian ancestor, existed as far back as in the Carboniferous period, in any shape, then the whole science of geology is so completely wrong that all the geologists will resign their jobs and take up truck driving." Hence, for the present at least, science rejects the attractive explanation that man made these mysterious prints in the mud of the Carboniferous with his feet. Ingalls suggested the prints were made by some as yet unknown kind of amphibian. But today's scientists do not really take the amphibian theory seriously. Human-sized Carboniferous bipedal amphibians do not fit into the accepted scheme of evolution much better than Carboniferous human beings. They wreak havoc with our ideas of early amphibians, requiring a host of evolutionary developments we know nothing about. Ingalls wrote the following: "What science does know is that, anyway, unless 2 and 2 are 7, and unless the Sumerians had airplanes and radios and listened to Amos and Andy, these prints were not made by any Carboniferous period man." Well, no, I don't know about the Sumerians there. In 1983, the Moscow News gave a brief but intriguing report on what appeared to be a human footprint in a maybe 100-million-year-old Jurassic rock next to a giant 3-toed dinosaur footprint. The discovery occurred in the Turkmen Republic in what was then the southeastern USSR. Professor Amanyazov, corresponding member of the Turkmen SSR Academy of Sciences, said that although the print resembled a human footprint, there was no conclusive proof that it was made by a human being. This discovery has not received much attention, but then, given the current mindset of the scientific community, such neglect is to be expected. We only know of a few cases, and this is the author speaking again here, of such extremely anomalous discoveries. But considering that many such discoveries probably go unreported, we wonder how many there might actually be. And that concludes our, I guess, introduction into Cremo and Thompson's work here. Again, if you have the time, please make up your own mind. Go and read the book. Nothing like figuring out for yourself what it is all about. We're concluding our show, not today, because we still have an article here. I want to quickly explain to you what that is. There's a very interesting article that was written in 2019, which we came across. Could an industrial pre-human civilization have existed on Earth before ours? And we're going to go into some details of that. Very interesting proposition here, and it was actually published. Let me see. I'll tell you where it was published. Here we go. Scientific American. The article was actually published in Scientific American. And also from June 2017, there's an article here. World's oldest Homo sapiens fossils found in Morocco. And they pushed, essentially, researchers have redated a long overlooked skull from a cave called Jebel Irhoud to a startling 300,000 years ago and unearthed new fossils and stone tools. The result is the oldest well-dated evidence of Homo sapiens, not Homo erectus, okay, pushing back the appearance of our kind by 100,000 years. Okay, and that's where we'll leave it next week. But those are two articles we're going to share with you. Very interesting stuff. But Dave, look, it certainly is worth at least looking at some of this evidence, right? I mean it would be such a monumental discovery if we truly found out that we or someone like us has been around for such a long time. And I'd just like to remind everybody, I have no truck with evolution. Evolution is a nice theory. It's a good theory, right? It's well established for most people. That's fine. But there's certainly things that are in existence and that do not contradict evolutionary theory, but they still exist. And I'll give you 3 examples. My favorite examples, and Dave knows what they are: the shark, the crocodile, and the coelacanth. Right? So, okay, let's just say evolution is a thing. All right, I got no problem with that. There it is. Evolution is there. So what evolution proposes, though, is the blind, which means unguided development of species.
Random.
Okay? Random. We adapt to our environment randomly. Okay? Or so the theory goes. And whoever adapts the best wins. Not the strongest, not the best, not the smartest, but whoever has got the best adaptation. Okay? Not the biggest teeth, not the biggest claws, the best adaptation to whatever environmental changes are coming. Now, if you're a shark, or a crocodile for that matter, or a coelacanth, you clearly have reached the pinnacle of where you should go. You have reached a stasis, evolutionary stasis, because you can't optimize on your
evolutionary stasis. I love it. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. You can use it. Everybody, feel free to use it. Because you have reached your optimal configuration.
There's no more changes you can make to be any better. Yes.
No, you might be smaller, you might be bigger, right? It doesn't mean you're not a crocodile anymore or a shark. You're just changing size. But that's driven usually by environmental factors like food sources, etc., right?
Yeah, predation. Your prey determines your size. Yeah.
Correct. Exactly right. And it doesn't mean that you're from a crocodile you turn into a butterfly, because that's evolution, right? Turning a small crocodile into a big crocodile, that's not
wings, my beautiful wings.
That's right. And so I propose here, and the coelacanth, of course, the last fossil record we have of the coelacanth is a bony fish, like a really ancient fish, right? Is 60 million years ago. So for the longest time, the establishment, right, said, well, the coelacanth clearly died out with the dinosaurs 60 million years ago. That's where we think the dinosaurs died out, right?
We didn't find any more.
So that's clearly what happened. Yeah, no. But in those intervening years, the coelacanth, completely unaware of his proposed extinction, continued to exist, much to the chagrin of the scientific community. And the fishermen off the coast of Madagascar in the Indian Ocean were quite happy to pull him out of the ocean, even though apparently he doesn't make very good eating.
That's right.
Same fish. In fact, exactly
the same.
Unchanged. Yeah. Unchanged, my friend, David, for 60 million years.
Right. Take that, evolution.
Take that, evolution. So, but that's okay though, because I mean, like I said though, once you have reached evolutionary stasis or optimum, why go further, right? What's the point, right? But then of course it would assume that there is some guiding force that would assume that you have reached your perfect adaptation.
So why haven't they continued? If we're constantly randomizing our production, you would imagine that the coal face, like the extreme edge, the edge, like edge computing, the edge of the design would be very broad now with seriously different adaptations, right?
Yeah,
it'd be crazy.
But the thing is,
the ocean would be teeming with different kinds.
Oh, absolutely. But that's not the case. So
that's right.
There seems to be something else at play. Let's just say, because again, this debate is actually not going anywhere.
There'd be so many. They'd be in the atmosphere. That's
right. And maybe they are. But the point here is that these creatures exist, and clearly they didn't. There was no further need for them to adapt. or to evolve. Adaptation might happen, but evolution clearly did not. So why then, Dave? Why then, in my esteemed listenership, do we insist that human beings have to continue to evolve? I mean, we are extremely unfit for living. Becky, what are you saying? That sounds like crazy talk. Actually,
You have
no.
1 minute to describe it.
Childbirth, the size of a child's head, the complete uselessness of a child for its first year and longer, right? Completely unprepared for survival. All of those things, right, make us very poorly adapted, okay, or evolved to live in this world, okay? But I believe that for the longest time we've existed with civilization at our beck and call, going right back millions of years. And that's why we are the way we are, weak and helpless. And to be honest with you, if you leave a child out in the world, that's it, done. That's it, you're done. Whereas a child that is born to animals, like a cow or horse or lion cub, they can walk around. They're just fine, hopping around, doing all that. Within hours, they walk around.
That's right. Ours aren't.
So
Ours requires so much intervention that it's almost senseless.
Yeah. So, but I've got more to say on that next week. But it's just something to think about. So why, if we have reached our physical pinnacle, like I'm talking about the physical evolution of the human being, right? Why change further? And why couldn't we have been around for millions of years in our present form? And there's the music, Dave.
It sure is. Look, stay tuned for Jer Bear's awesome show, After Dark, or whatever it's called. I forget now, sorry, brain fart. But we'll see you next week for another Shiny Flat Out. Don't forget to subscribe and do all those things we normally do. And stay safe and just keep watching the news. That's what we do. Take care.
Thank you for listening.